Was no collision. I just love him. Sir John O'Keefe was not hit by a car. Literally never happened. Then he goes on about Proctor and his text messages, and he's really honing in on how Proctor, the lead investigator, botched this case. He stated in his opening how he thought it was interesting that prosecution in their opening statement never even brought up former Trooper Proctor. Pretty interesting. I like that he kind of toned it back and made this about Officer John O'Keefe and said that it was a tragedy. They talk about reasonable doubt, which they did hone in on reasonable doubt a lot, but they needed to even hone it in a little bit more. He talks about how chaotic the scene was, how loud and all the lights and so many people out there, yet Brian Albert still did not wake up and come out of the house even to help first responders, to help Officer John O'Keefe, to check on his sister-in-law, any of that. Talks about how other police officers had said that they believed Officer John O'Keefe was in a fight. And then he keeps bringing back former Trooper Proctor about his ties with the family and how he never went into the house and that he basically just had a botched investigation. He says that Trooper Proctor was fired because of the last trial. He talks about how powerful and influential the Albert family is in Canton. He says that there will be data and forensic data showing that Officer John O'Keefe went into 34 Fairview. Can't wait to hear more about that. He talks about the new medical examiner that they have. She will talk about the head injury on the back of his head immediately incapacitated him, and that there was no hypothermia, no frostbite, no damage based on cold or frost, which is reasonable doubt. All of this is going to lead to Officer John O'Keefe was not injured by a vehicle. He was injured somewhere and was moved to the side of the yard. He did not suffer any injury at all that links him to being hit by a 6,000-pound vehicle. There was no collision. There's an image of John's arm injury. Talk about Chloe, the Albert's dog, and how they rehomed her or got rid of her, even though they had her for 7 years, and then gets rid of her after this incident. Talks about that John's head injury was not just from falling flat on the ground or anything flat surface. There's a pattern in it and it had to be from something sharp. He talks about how all of the people inside 34 Fairview all walked out of that house and did not see a 6-foot body, and they all drove past where the body would have been and did not see a body. Talks about Brian Laughlin, I don't know if it's Laughlin or Laughlin, Lucky Laughlin, the snowplow driver, and he talks about how he drove by the house at 2:30 and there was no body or anything outside, and then about 3:30 a.m. there was a Ford Edge outside of the house. Albert family owns Ford Edges. Says this is a rising mountain of reasonable doubt. I like that. Then he goes and talks about how Karen Reed, when she was at home, when Karen Reed went back to Officer John O'Keefe, she went to sleep and kind of was in and out of sleep. But while she was sleeping, everybody, all the party goers that were at 34 Fairview were doing stuff. So the Brian Higgins and Brian Albert butt dials, Jen McCabe Googling Hoslang 2 in cold, and then deleting it. He goes in and talks about when Karen hit Officer John O'Keefe's car at Officer John O'Keefe's house. Talks about Karen being panicked and wondering what happened. So of course she's saying things like, could I have hit him? Stuff like that. I like that he said the prosecution twist the words of admission. They said, she never said I hit him. It was never reported, not once did she say I hit him. Again, brings up how powerful and influential the Albert family is. Proctor's long-standing relationship with the family. He said, that's not just bias and coincidence, that's corruption. Yes. It's about how Proctor had access to the vehicle in the taillight before any taillight evidence was found. Reasonable doubt. There was no DNA found on any of the pieces of taillight. I don't remember this from last trial, but on Officer John O'Keefe's shoe that was found, there was 5 unidentified male DNA. Explain that. Reasonable doubt. He then explains reasonable doubt and moral certainty, which I thought that was good. He needed to do that a little bit more, but I'm sure he'll do that more in this case. There was no collision. This case is the definition of reasonable doubt. Not guilty, not guilty, not guilty.